So, Wiz, LangGraph Studio, this agent interactive development environment, it's obviously a low code, no code tool, right? For building agents?
Oh, it is a low code, no code tool. Building agents maybe is sticky language around that.
Ooh, it's not. So it is kind of awesome, though, right? We did get a 2 minutes to wow experience with LangGraph Studio, didn't we?
It is if we were to classify this under dope or nope, strongly dope.
Strongly dope, but not a low code, no code tool to help build agents. Rather, maybe a low code tool for what exactly?
For monitoring them, getting visibility into them, troubleshooting them, iterating on them. So still covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, okay. So we still need some LangGraph to go with the studio in the end.
We do still need some LangGraph.
All right. Well, let's see if we can introduce this new tool, kind of this new in between topic, by covering some core concepts that many of you know. And then we're going to do some double build action today, Wiz. Sound good? We're going to go from mild to wild.
I can't wait.
See you back in a bit, dude. I'm Dr. Greg. That's the Wiz. And thank you, AI Makerspace community, for joining us today, Wednesday, where we're always live looking at the latest from the LLM Edge. This week, we're going to take a look at the newly released Agent IDE called LangGraph Studio from LangChain. This was something that piqued our interest because we thought, man, sure, this has to be a low code, no code tool for building agents. It's about time we see one of these. As we dug in, we realized, well, it wasn't quite exactly that and doesn't seem to be aimed at solving quite exactly that problem. This is the topic of today's event. Let's figure out exactly what we're going to learn as we get into it. Questions along the way, please throw them in the Slido link and upvote your favorites. We should have plenty of time for discussion, as in the end, we are going to keep it relatively low code today. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. What is an Agent IDE? Specifically, what is this LangGraph Studio that we heard about and we want to take a look at today? As we align our aim to the day, we want to understand what the role of this kind of Agent IDE is going to be for AI engineers or leaders like you that are trying to develop production LLM applications. We want to understand how we can visualize agents, both the agents and agents within a multi-agent system, as well as different tools that we might have in our toolboxes that we give to an agent. These are slightly different things to visualize, and tools like LangGraph Studio can help us to really kind of grok that as a concept. So look out for that today. Of course, we'll build some applications. If you've been following our content for a while, some of the applications might look a little familiar. We're going to adapt them to LangGraph Studio. So let's talk a little bit about agents, a little bit about LangGraph, and then let's introduce this concept of the Agent IDE before we get into some builds and see how we can leverage a tool like this. So agents, for the purposes of today's talk, let's just root ourselves in this idea that LangGraph reminds us that agents with access to tools can help us solve problems, important problems, and we can sort of cast it as a problem into an agent application built on the LangGraph framework. So we want to give LLMs access to tools. We want to give agents access to tools in short. The agent is going to help us sort of decide which tool to pick out. This is in a single agent system where you might have access to different data with each tool. So you might be doing a Google search in one tool. You might be doing a search on archive for specific research papers with another tool. And you might be looking at actually your own proprietary data with a third tool, for instance. But it's really all about collecting the right information so that we can put it in context and we can get the best possible answer to our question or the task or the problem that we've given to our agentic application. And when we think about agents, it's important to remind ourselves that the agentic idea, the idea of an agent is not like a thing as much as it's a pattern. It is a pattern of reasoning, of action, and of observation. The reasoning action pattern or the react pattern allows us to ask a question, call the LLM, and have the LLM decide which actions to take, which tool to pick out of the tool belt, for instance. After a tool is selected, we go and we retrieve some data, we do some search, we leverage the tool so that we return some result. That result we can observe and we can decide, do I have the answer yet? If so, let me go to my output. If not, let me go back and find some additional supplemental information. We can simplify this agentic react loop, and we can look at it like this. We ask a question, we enter into the loop. The agent or the LLM here is doing the reasoning and then deciding how to act. The action is where the tool selection takes place. The observation comes out of that, and we feed all the information back to the agent to decide, reasoning again, whether or not an answer is there. So the action is really the place of the toolbox. This is where we put our tools. And the tools, of course, they each will provide some information, put ourselves in formation with the result, with the data that comes out of this. So this reasoning and action and observation, this sort of loop that we're looping through as we build our conversation history within our agent, is kind of the core engine in a simple agentic application. And so this is what we see in this image as well. And getting comfortable with visualizing agents is what today is really kind of geared towards most of all. Remember, agents with access to tools can help us solve problems, says LangGraph. Now, LangGraph, in their most recent iteration of their docs, the very top line that you'll see is building, quote, language agents as graphs. One of the more classic ways we can talk about LangGraph, and that they've been using this language for quite some time, is it's a tool, it's a library for building stateful applications. They've layered in this multi-actor applications here because, of course, multi-agents are all the rage. But stateful is really, really important. And it's quite important as we think about the Agent IDE today. A state, of course, is just a particular condition that something is in at a specific time. And this idea of tracking the particular condition of where things are in our application at any given time, this is pretty essential to what we're trying to do with an agentic IDE. In LangGraph, you can build many types of applications, from single LLM calls. You're kind of overkill by using LangGraph with this, to fully autonomous agents. However, really, a lot of times, instead of a fully autonomous agent, we want to build what are called state machines. These state machines allow us a little bit more control than full autonomy. This is important in enterprise, and it's important anytime you don't necessarily want the AI making a decision that directly impacts a customer potentially very negatively. And so if you're on the fence about some sort of customer input or what you might be pushing out to your users, you might want to put a human in the loop. This is very easy with state machines, not so easy with fully autonomous agents. So this state machine idea allows us to kind of have more flexibility. And it does this by really building out these Lang graphs. And using graphs is quite useful for a number of reasons. The first is that it's much more intuitive to be able to draw the thing on the whiteboard in like a system diagram form and then port it directly over to the code in LangGraph. This idea that if you can draw the flow, you can build the flow is really cool, and one of the key features that makes LangGraph very, very powerful. This is this idea of we're not using a DAG, a directed acyclic graph, but rather we're using this sort of idea of a cyclic graph, a directed cyclic graph, if you will, a DCAG, if you'd like. And so building these graphs is, of course, simple. It's the same as building any other graph. We're going to have nodes and we're going to have edges. When we think about the nodes, we want to think about a function or a LangChain expression language runnable, for those of you that have built a lot with LangChain. But we can think about kind of the node in a very basic introductory sense being a simple tool call. More generally, we can think of it as an action, right? The action of calling a tool, of which there might be more than one. And so the nodes are going to be very interesting and where we start to be able to differentiate agents from tools. The edges are paths we might want to take through, where we're passing our state object to next, allowing us to track how our state is moving in time. So we build what's called a state graph, and we sort of initialize this thing. We build it out with the nodes and the edges. We add introductory nodes first. We want to kind of start somewhere, always. We want to make sure that we're connecting pieces. And depending on something happening over here, I might want to go in this direction over here. So you can add what are called conditional edges. And you can obviously also close these loops just as you start them and add the conditions. We want to make sure we're building a closed loop system. So if we can kind of think about this more complex visualization we were working with earlier, where a question comes in, the agent decides which tool should I pick up. The tool then produces some result. That result is observed, is added to the conversation history. The agent decides, do I know the answer yet? Do I need another tool? We can kind of collapse this back down. So forget the observations and even forget the tools now. And we can kind of see this coming together of these two visualizations that we've used so far. And fundamentally, we have agent and we have action. And these are going to be the core pieces that we can start learning about LangGraph Studio with. When you talk about LangGraph, the key benefits to LangGraph are, yes, this idea of cycles, yes, this idea of sort of this directed cyclic graphs, but importantly, we have two ideas. The first is persistence. Persistence allows us to automatically save the state after each step in a graph. And it allows us to pause and to resume graph execution at any point. So state persists here. The other key feature that's related to state and to persistence is human in the loop, as we mentioned earlier. This allows us to interrupt graph execution to sort of say, I don't know. Okay, you can keep going. Or actually, let's divert and go into this direction versus what you were originally going to do, agent. And this idea of interrupting graph execution, pausing and resuming graph execution, automatically saving state, tracking and managing state, this really sets us up to understand what this Agent IDE is really doing at the end of the day. First off, what it's not doing is it's not giving us a low-code way to build applications like we thought it was when we first took a look at this. And we thought, well, let's do a little low-code, no-code action today. Rather, what LangGraph Studio says very clearly is at any point, you can interact with state. That's all there is to it. They go on to say, hey, we're not trying to replace code editors. In fact, there's a quick pop out to VS Code you'll see, but we're trying to augment the developer experience here. Even though development still requires coding. Naturally. So let's see how this works. We're going to do a couple of builds today. We're going to start with our first build, and we are going to make it very simple. The first build is going to be a basic agent that uses a sort of Google search setup and then also can have access to archive. And what we'll do is we'll see if we can build just a simple agent action loop. What does it look like in LangGraph Studio? Well, it turns out it looks a lot like the one that we've already showed you a few times. Let's take a closer look and see what it takes to set up LangGraph Studio, to get working with it, and to build our first simple agent with the whiz, who's going to show us how to track state for a simple agentic LLM application in IDE, not low code, but actual code. Wiz, over to you, man.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to make sure that my screen is shared so you guys can see it. And with that, we should be good to go. So the basic idea here is pretty straightforward. We want to be able to use LangGraph Studio in order to interact with our agentic applications. So how does this work? Well, first things first, we will need to get LangGraph Studio. You might notice that we have some Mac feeling widgets right up here. And this is because as of right now, this only works on Apple Silicon. So in order to use this, you will need to make sure that you have Apple Silicon. If you have it, you can just download the DMG and then drag it on over to your applications. So, the installation is pretty straightforward. you do have to make sure you have that Docker version 2.22 at least. So once you have that, what you can do is just git clone this example repo and then open Studio. And when you open Studio, you're going to be presented with something that looks like this. And you're going to want to just highlight which folder you want to open. And inside the folder should have a few things. We're going to talk about those in just a second. But the idea is you click open, something happens down here. The astute among you will realize that is Docker. So Docker is powering this thing. And actually, we can see that by looking at Docker. And we can see that there's this stack of containers that's running for us. And that's all handled through LangGraph Studio. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so you'll notice we have this beautiful picture, right? So this is exactly what Greg was talking about. This is our application. These are our nodes. As you can see, we can move them all around. We can add breakpoints or interrupts to them, which is very handy. We can do all kinds of things. You'll also notice on the bottom here that we have our state. And what our state is it is however we've defined it. So how do we see what this agent looks like under the hood? Well, pretty straightforwardly, we click open in VS Code and we're brought to Visual Studio Code where we can see exactly what's going on. Just zoomed in a little bit here so we can see it a little bit easier. So we have an application, and the application is as follows, right? We have some agent that relies on some utils that we've built. The utils are nodes, state, and you can see here that our state has a messages field, and then some tools, and you can see here that we have Tavili search. You'll also see that our agent defines the graph, and then we have this final graph, which is our compiled workflow. We also have a requirements.txt, which contains all of the requirements we need to run our graph. And then we have a very important piece of information. This is going to be familiar if you've used the CLI tool for LangGraph. But basically, this is going to contain our dependencies for our graph. It's going to contain what the actual graphs are, and then what our environment variable, our environment file is, our .env, if we should need one. Spoiler alert, we will need one. Not a big deal. Okay, so here's the deal. This agent needs to point to a variable. So it points, you'll see that we have the structure, right? So /myagent, agent.py, graph. This needs to point to a compiled graph variable. So when we look at our agent, right? So you'll see that our agent is in myAgent, then it's in agent.py, and then we have this graph variable, which is associated with a compiled graph. So that's one piece of trivia, let's say, right, from the LangGraph CLI tool, is that this is how we point to a specific agent. And then this is all we need to do extra, right? So we set up our LangGraph application. Everyone loves that. Straightforward. We've got event on it if you want to go deep on that. And then we need to point at it in this graphs dependency. This is a cosmetic name, so name it something useful. Otherwise, we're good to go. So let's head back to our LangGraph Studio and take a peek at the things we have, right? So this is exactly the graph we built. And this is our state, which is just messages and accepts a list of messages. You'll see here that our agent graph, as we named it, right, in VS Code is located here. And that's it. So let's try to use this. Let's ask a question like, what does the archive paper on QLoRa, say? Okay. So we've added something to our initial state. Let's just put an interrupt here at agent, see what happens. We're going to go ahead and hit submit now. And immediately we hit that stop. Since we entered our chain through start and got to agent, we can see exactly what is the output at this checkpoint. So let's say, actually, we're going to add another stop here and we're going to remove our interrupt from our agent. All right, let's continue to our action. And you can see here that our action is going to use the Tvili search results to, with the query archive paper QLoRa. And again, we can look in and see exactly what this is doing. Okay, we can see the JSON blob that is actually used here. Okay, very cool, very cool. Let's go ahead and let's head to our next node. And you can see that we're in the continue edge right now, right? So we're in our agent. It's made the decision. Our next node is action. Let's head to action. All right. Now that we're in our action node, we get the output of action. It's that's it. That's how it do, right? We can again check exactly what is going on here. We can see what what this looks like in JSON or in the values. You can see that the content refers to an abstract from the Hugging Face Papers URL. Very cool. And then we can head back to our agent, and our agent is going to produce some kind of result or response, and then we're going to see that we are done. And that is it, right? Something interesting, whenever we hover over these different sections, we can see the nodes that they're occurring in, right? So this is the idea of the IDE. We can stop wherever we want. We can look at this in pretty mode or JSON blob mode. We can look at everything that we would need to. We can run it. We can pause it. We can stop it. Everything like that, all from the UI. We can modify our state. We can edit. So let's say we come back here, right, and we edit. And instead of this, archive paper QLoRa, we say archive paper QLoRa. Maybe we put, Tim Detmers. Spell his name right's probably correct. And then we can fork that. And now we can see an entirely different, response that we extract. And we can see that there are two different forks, right? And those forks led to different results. All of this is available through this UI with no additional setup than what I've showed you before. We're going to do something a little bit, different here. Okay, so we're getting Tvili. Tvili is not bad, but we're trying to search archive. Let's add archive. So again, we just hit open in VS Code. We're going to go to our tools, and we're going to add archive. I very stealthily did this behind the scenes. So we're adding an additional tool to our tools, and it's called archive query run. Let's save that and head back, and you'll notice that we're rebuilding our agent, right? So we rebuild the agent whenever we update the file, just like you're familiar with if you're used to things like Chainlit or Fast API or all kinds of web frameworks. We have this auto reload or the hot reload, which is pretty cool. So let's ask the same thing, right? Let's say, what was the archive QLoRa paper all about, right? And then we can submit that. You can watch this go. Boom, we see some stuff. Okay, that's cool. We get some outputs. That's cool. And of course, you'll notice that we use the archive tool instead of the Tvili tool because we have access to a better tool. And that is the idea of LangGraph Studio. You'll also notice that even though we added a new tool to action, because we didn't modify the nodes, and we can check the nodes here, right? We didn't add a new node, and so there's no additional node in the UI. This is just an additional tool in this action nodes tool belt. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass you back to Greg, who's going to tell us about our next, slightly more complex application.
Wiz, I think this is, first of all, this is really cool. And I wonder if you can just rerun it from the top so we can look at these beautiful lines that are sort of this is like primo stakeholder presentation stuff, ask a question and we can sort of watch the flow. It's that's really great. I'm really loving this visually. Yes. If we can sort of watch each step of this and
go to the agent, go to action, back to agent.
So cool.
Yeah, and you'll notice there that there was an error because I forgot to populate the message. So something else that's very useful for this is it is very effective. It is very effective at exactly that task, right? Which is troubleshooting, debugging, helping us understand where our application is failing.
And just one more thing while we have this up, like the action box, the action on the diagram, that actually really contains like all of the tools that we have in any single agent system, right? That we could put 5 tools in there, 10 tools in there, and it'll still just be one box on this diagram. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically exactly what you said. So because actions are in the tool node, so you'll see that we have our nodes here. We have should continue, we have call model, and we have tool node, and all the tool node is a list of tools. So we can add 100 tools here, and it will only ever be one tool node.
Yeah. Okay. And so if we have many agents, do they each have their own action node? I guess we'll find out soon, but
I guess we're gonna find out pretty soon.
Oh, all right. Yeah, let's go ahead and introduce this next build. We'll see you back in just a couple of minutes, Wiz. All right, so build number 2. You may have seen this one before. If you are familiar with our work, we're gonna try to write a dope blog on a research paper with a multi-agent setup. So this is a hierarchical setup where a top-level supervisor agent is actually going to route to lower-level agent-led teams for research and for document authoring or blog writing, let's say. So we've got the supervisor, we've got research, and we've got writing. And again, let's sort of say we have a goal. We want to write a dope blog. We want it to be dope too. So what we did is we said, okay, let's set this up. So we have the top level supervisor. The research team will just be a little agent that we just built. It'll have access to Tavily for general internet search. It'll also have access to archive. And then our document team will have a writer, we'll have a note taker, we'll have a copywriter, and we'll have a dopeness editor trying to up how legit the blog is. Okay, so the research team, we could look at it like this. The document team, we could look at it like this. Note taker here is just somebody that is going to be doing some researching. You can look specifically into the prompts here, and we've done this in a past event we did on multi-agent RAG with LangChain. But the purpose of today is to sort of think about, okay, now that we have this LangGraph Studio set up, how does this sort of enhance the way we're able to talk about these tools, the way we're able to think about these tools, the way we're able to visualize these tools? So we could actually show this directly from the LangGraph Studio setup, where if we wanted to build our sort of AI Makerspace editorial team here with the supervisor, the research team, and the blog writing team, we could then look and dig down into each of these and see that the research team actually is a supervisor that is overseeing search and archive paper retrieval. And the document team actually has a supervisor that's overseeing doc writer, note taker, copy editor, and dopeness editor. So we now have this sort of beautifully nested supervision happening throughout our multi-agent setup. What does this look like exactly? Back to the Wiz to show us how he built it and how you can too. Wiz, back to you.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is we're gonna show you the code, but it's a pile. It's a big old long list of code. So the first thing I want to focus on is a couple things. It's a lot of code, right? So if I just do you the disservice of scrolling quickly through all of it, right? Oh, boom, here we go. Tons of code. However, once that code is ready, once it's written, once it's in a state that's acceptable to you, you'll see that we have one monolith instead of having sub modules and everything like this, just to keep it nice and easy and grokkable. Once you have that set up, though, it's really quite straightforward to take the work that you've done as a engineer, right? So as a let's say you're at a role where your title is AI engineer. It's really easy to take the work you've done as an AI engineer and present it to people who are not so familiar with or comfortable reading this, right? And again, sorry for the scrolling, but it's just to make the point. So what are we going to do here? Well, it's very straightforward. Very sorry. Okay, so we add the graphs. This time, we're going to add 3 graphs because our actual final application is a graph that has 2 graphs, right? So if you recall our LangGraph event where we dove into LangGraph, this is the same application, right? We have this super graph, which has 2 different nodes, and those nodes are each an entire graph. One, the research graph, and the other, the document team, aka the authoring graph. So what do we do now that we've set this up? Well, we head over to our beautiful UI, and we can go ahead. I'm just gonna focus on the first graph first here. So this is our super graph, or our parent agent, and you'll see that we have this supervisor node that has a blog writing team, a researching team, and then an end node. And you'll notice, right, that we have this fun loop color here. So we have this conditional edge. That's what the dotted line represents, right? That's going to either send some output to the blog writing team or the research team. So that's going to send this state that we have that you can see here. There's actually a translation step that occurs that we'll talk about in the code, but the idea is that we go to one of these nodes, and then we return some response to a supervisor who is going to, again, make a decision, either sending it to the end or perhaps to another section. So what is in the research team? Well, let's go to the research team. And what's in the research team is, you bet, it's a whole graph, right? And it looks very similar to the other graph. We have a start, we have a supervisor, we have a search function, and we have a paper information retriever, and then we have a end node. And same thing here. The supervisor is going to determine which member to go to next, and then if the result is determined to be finished, it will finish it. Okay, so let's ask this one a question and see how it does. Let's say, can you tell me about, the Q Laura paper, and then provide information about the authors of the paper. Okay, so again, initial state, we're going to send this to start, and that's it. Okay, so I'm going to hit submit here, and we're going to go in. We're going to go first to search. We're going to get some kind of a result from search, and then this is just going to go. So notice that, we have this. You can see this because it's much more extended, that it's kind of pausing, right? But the idea is that we can see the searching. We can see the information flowing through the network. We can see where it's going. We can see what it's doing. All very cool. We can see the authors of the QLoRa paper. We have the ability to see that they're Tim Detmers, Artedoro. This is perfect. Okay. So that's the idea, though, right? Which is that we have the ability to make these determinations about what to do, when to do it, how to do it, which tools to use. Now, something else that we can do is kind of look at hijack or fork state, right? So let's look, for instance, you know, we have this next field, we have optional, we have search. What if we instead said paper information retriever, right? So instead of going to the search first, what if we went to paper information retriever, and then we go ahead and we fork that, and now we can see that we're going to the paper information retriever. So this is kind of the power of this studio, right? The ability to see, what if I went somewhere else first, right? So you might be asking yourself, well, Chris, why? You know, why do I care about that? Well, let's think about a situation where we can see that there's a difference between the final outputs, and we want to know, you know, the quality difference. And we find that if we go to paper information retriever first, we get better results. Well, then we have something to guide our a prompting strategy when we're looking at our supervisor node, right? So this is the kind of idea. This is how it helps us to debug. This is how it helps us to learn everything that we would need to know. Now let's look at the document team. I'm not going to run this one because it will take very long, but the idea is that it's the same thing as we just saw in the previous two examples, except this time, as you can see, it's slightly more octopus-like, right? So we have these different teams or members of the team. We have our doc writer, our note taker, our copy editor, our dopeness editor, and we have a number of different things we can do in state. But the basic idea is the same here, right? Which is that even though this looks very, very like visually, let's say it looks visually busy, right? It still looks a lot more parsable and explainable to someone who is non-technical, right? I mean, again, saying, well, we go from the supervisor, and then we go to one of these, and then we come back, and then we go to another one of these, right? Visually, this makes sense. It's easy to read. And then finally, our parent agent, remember that even though these appears one block here, under the hood, they're all of this. And that's another great abstraction for explaining this to someone non-technical, right? We don't necessarily need to show execs down in the weeds. We don't need to show them the octopus that exists below the surface, right? We can show them the final beautiful state of this application in plain English that most people, even without knowledge of AI at all, would be able to determine what's happening. So that's all dope. And before I pass you back to Greg, one thing I do want to touch on is that, let's say you have access to LangGraph Cloud and you want to see this thing running in production. Well, they've also added a beautiful little deploy button for you here so that once you're good with the agent, once you're, once you are happy with the state, once you're happy with the state of the agent, you can deploy it right to LangGraph Cloud. I mean, again, this is not a tool that is going to build you an agent, right? Let's remind ourselves that we have to do all of this coding, right? But the way that we interact with it, interface with it, can communicate about it is so tight, visually appealing, everything else. With that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send you guys back to Greg. But before I do, classic, I'm going to ask that you subscribe, hit the like button, hit the little bell thing on YouTube. We're live every Wednesday, always talking about stuff like this. And with that, I'm going to send you guys back to Greg.
All right. Okay. So I love this idea, Wiz, of the octopus under the surface. Is something very powerful there, that you can show what you're doing at the right layer of abstraction to the right stakeholders. I wanted to just sort of click in on, now that we had a chance to look at you build these two, and you kind of mentioned, well, there's all this code too. Like, was building agents actually easier with this in any way? Was it harder in any way? Can you talk a little bit about how you're going to fit this into your workflow from here?
It was not harder, for sure. This tool sits on top of the stack, and it doesn't really add any overhead, or you're not doing anything extra. I mean, you have to make one JSON, blob, which really, if you wanted to, you could probably just have an LLM create. But I think it didn't make it easier to build the initial agent. However, it did make it easier to troubleshoot, to make sure that the agent was working the way that I was hoping it was working, to make sure it was doing what I had hoped it was supposed to do. Just some inside baseball. Before the event, Greg and I were working on this, showcasing this tool addition thing, and I was able to through the LangGraph UI immediately understand the typo that I had made and correct it. So again, does that make the overall development experience better? For now, I'm going to go with it doesn't make it worse, and it adds something to a lot of different personas. So we'll say sure.
Yeah. It definitely adds a little something, a little pizzazz to it, and I think it definitely is a flex if you pick this up and you start using it and start leveraging it before others. So yeah, I mean, have some fun out there on the edge this week, guys, and I think taking away Wiz from today as we get into QA. So please do throw your questions into the Slido for us if you have any. It really was all about interacting with state, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this was all about. Like, we can go back to LangGraph and persistence and human in the loop, and it's sort of like, it seems like it's connected very much to this idea of tracking state, and this being a key aspect of building production LLM applications with agents. Still having to write the code, visualizations, obviously cool, very awesome to see those, especially the nested ones. And then being able to do multi-agents, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to, but we pulled it off. So that was super cool. Yeah, all right. So shout out to the chat for the great comments. Loving them coming in. I want to go ahead, and we do have some folks in the audience here asking some questions. And before we get to those, I just want to kind of contextualize this for everybody. I mean, when we came into this, Wiz, we were sort of like, oh, it's a low code, no code tool. It's going to be like, maybe we sort of up the layer of abstraction that we can work at. Maybe we can go back and forth and sort of build and iterate together on this, because it's actually become so much more simple to build these agent applications. And we're actually not quite at that point in the industry yet, right? The low code, no code agent build point. There's not a really easy way to do this. I mean, you had to write a bunch of code to get especially that multi-agent one to work, and that's still true today, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still super true. I think that's something that is, and we've talked about this before in events and everything like that, but it's part of the maturation of the space, right?
That's right.
So this is something that exists in the form it exists today, where it is not useful to build new things with. However, you can kind of see, you can see how this would potentially be maneuvered towards something that allowed you to build things, right? And if this is like
that's right.
If this is like a what is to come, right? A way that we might be able to in the future, near or far, interact and build these systems. I mean, if you could just plop these boxes down, right?
Wow.
I mean, think of the number of people that could build agentic systems, right, compared to the amount of people who are going to sit through writing all of that code, right? And the understanding is so this is the part that trips me up. It makes me feel so stoked about these kinds of tools, is that, and they exist. There's other tools that exist that help us to do this, and et cetera, et cetera. But, the way you think about the tool when you're writing the code is precisely the same as when you see the boxes on the screen, right? There's just more stuff that you're typing. So if we can get to that stage where we can build these systems in these UIs, similar to what companies like VoiceFlow are doing, similar to what some other people have been doing, I think the future is looking pretty good to me. So
yeah, and soon enough, I'm sure we'll do an event where I do a little whiteboarding. You do a little box movement around. Bada bing, bada boom. We just low coded up an agent, but it's not there yet today. And that is the main point that I wanted to sort of end on. Okay, so Matul asks in the chat, Langsmith is good for debugging as well. Wondering how much more LangGraph Studio is actually useful beyond Langsmith. Want to comment on this?
So this is just under the hood. This is just Langsmith, right? So it's a prettier version of Langsmith for agents that lets us interact as it's happening. So for visibility, much better. For live debugging, I would say that the tool is more useful for live debugging these LangGraph applications.
Live debugging. Okay, so perfect segue into the next comment. This is on debugging. And the debugging that we saw today, does this make tools like AgentOps that we've looked at recently, does this make that tool unnecessary? Has LangGraph Studio basically taken everything we saw from AgentOps, or not quite, in your opinion, yet?
I mean, unnecessary is such a strong word. It adds value. AgentOps still has value.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah. And they, remember, the AgentOps guys, they started by solving the sort of problem they had, right? Of like, I can't see deep enough into the agent problem. And, hey, like this is about as busy and competitive as a space as it gets. So I'm sure that in the end, they're going to be competing for the same customers with a similar stack. So, yeah, I mean, let's keep our eyes peeled out here. With an AgentOps team that's totally focused on that, maybe they can build faster, and maybe they can build something that's more useful in the end. Again, still early days. To the comment in the chat, quite early days for AI. Christos asks, I just set up the example graph on my laptop. Awesome. How easy would it be to take the graphs that we create into some production code outside of LangGraph Cloud? I mean, that's relative to that one-click deploy you mentioned, right? It's supposed to be kind of nested within this larger ecosystem.
Yeah, it's it's the same amount of easy as it's always been, right? So, I mean, it's LangGraph has a number of good tools to deploy it. I mean, yes, of course, the LangGraph Cloud, that's the native integration, but the CLI can be useful to deploying it outside of those. LangServe is useful, blah, 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 blah. I mean, is the easiest path going to be their integration? I would hope so, right? Because it's their path. Is their path the only path that they support? No, absolutely not, right? So I think taking these to production is something that LangGraph or LangChain has shown us that they're committed to continue to do, even outside of their very specific ecosystem. Hopefully that answers the question. It looks awesome, though. I mean,
yeah. Right. Yeah, 100% does look awesome. Donna asks, under the covers, it seems like this is just the LG checkpointer, and he dropped a link here. You want to comment on that? And Don, good point. AgentOps definitely works on Windows, unlike LangGraph Studio today. I'm sure that'll happen soon. LG checkpointer, what is this? Maybe you can comment on this, Wiz.
So this is, yes, exactly. Remember,
nailed it, Don.
All this is a beautiful cover on top of an existing ecosystem right now. It's right. Showing us it in a way that's natural and communicatable, but it is not using novel technology.
Okay. All right.
Yes, that is the wizard behind the curtain, Don.
That's right. Okay, so Silver Heretic, aka V, asks, in the upcoming session on multi-agent systems in the cohort, is this going to be more advanced than this? I'm curious for you just to answer this, Wiz. Like, take more advanced, however you'd like here.
Yeah, that's the trick. More advanced. We're certainly going to dive deeper into it. We're certainly going to look at examples in more detail than we did today. But I think in terms of overall complexity of multi-agent systems, this is already past my comfortable ceiling in terms of what is production useful. Multi-agent systems that are at the level of complexity that we saw today are not really being used by industry or in industry to power things. And so when it comes down to it, we'll probably we want to cover these complex use cases because they're awesome, and we want to see how these tools work at the edge. But the actual useful applications are going to look much less complex than this. And so if complexity equal advanced, then there's the answer.
Yes, it is going to be more advanced. So we got to get down into like the true details of what defines a multi-agent system, not like the superficial stuff we did today. Let's just pontificate as we end here on Richard's question. So it's an impossible question. What's the product roadmap? But if you had to do some pontification here, Wiz, like if you were like building out the entire suite of stuff that LangChain, LangGraph, LangCloud, the Lang ecosystem, where are you taking this tool next? I think we already kind of talked about it, but towards the low code, no code, it's got to be, right? Like it can't just be for debugging in the end. What do you think?
I would be so shocked if the tool ends with just debugging, with just a visual representation. I'd be absolutely flabbergasted. Listen, I think we can talk a lot about timelines for how long that's going to take or how long they're going to work on it. But remember, they named it IDE, right?
Right.
IDE is a loaded term. It's clearly in beta. It's also called Studio. I mean, all of my history with these terms indicates that this is not the end of the road, and I think we're going to be able to click boxes around in a timeline that's reasonable. And something that I want to be very clear about, that I think I want to remind people of about LangChain's history. LangChain has traditionally been a very fast-moving, very throw it at the wall, see what sticks kind of company until maybe the last 8 months, maybe even to a year, where they're really focused on production capability. And so I think maybe these tools, the velocity that they've been cranking at might reduce from the outside, but I think that's going to come with more stability and more robust tooling that's going to help us to build these systems in a way that's reliable and scalable. And I think that's better for the ecosystem as we have a plethora of tools that can do this poorly. I think we want a tool that can do it very well, and I hope that's what they're working on.
There you have it, folks. That's what we can expect in the product roadmap. Our best guess. All right. Thanks, Wiz, for walking us through agents, multi-agents, and LangGraph Studio today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our weekly Wednesday session. If you're not part of our community yet, please jump in Discord and start building, shipping, and sharing with us today. Check out the Build, Ship, Share channel in Discord to see what other folks are building around the community, including in our courses. If you're interested in accelerating your LLM application development, check out one of our upcoming cohorts of the AI Engineering Bootcamp, one of the most popular courses on Maven, an industry-leading 10-week bootcamp. We just kicked off cohort 4, and it's going really well. We're having a blast. If you're interested in cohort 5, go ahead and submit your application. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or comments you have about the comprehensive curriculum that you'll find there. And that's it for today, folks. Next week, we are continuing our DSPY series with agents in DSPY. So that should be pretty exciting and quite advanced for those of you interested in upping the complexity. So we look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. In the meantime, please keep building, shipping, and sharing like the legends you are, and we will very much be doing the same. We'll see you on Discord, we'll see you on LinkedIn, and we'll see you on YouTube next week, everybody. Have a great week. Bye, guys. Thanks.